All right. Well, today we are beginning a new sermon series, and you can sort of exhale a little bit. I know the last sermon series about the political situation that we find ourselves in was pretty anxiety-driven, or not driven. It caused anxiety in us. And so we're going to exhale just a little bit, though, because Jesus does really call us to hard things. The last sermon in our last series was about giving up our idols. And today we're starting a sermon series called Prodigal. And we're going to take a few weeks, 3 weeks, to walk through the story of the prodigal son. And you will find that there are themes of that, of what are the things that we're holding on to throughout this series, because that's something that Jesus talked a lot about. And so we're going to get started here. The series is just simply called Prodigal. And today, the sermon is called Journey to Grace. And so would you pray with me before we get started? God, I thank you for your goodness to us, that you are here, you are moving, even when we don't see you moving. God, I pray that you would open hearts, continue to open hearts, that you would help me to say just what I should say today and not what I shouldn't. Have your way. In Jesus' name, amen. So I want to invite you to think a little bit about what you thought was the most important when you were younger. Maybe I'm talking about elementary school, maybe I'm talking about high school or college. What were the things that you thought were the most important? Some of those things we think are not that important now, right? If we're older, if we've got gray hair like I do. Maybe we can look back at those things and think, I wish I wouldn't have given so much time to thinking about which boy liked me or did not like me, which ones remembered my name or didn't. So there are things that, as we're younger, in our formation, we begin to think are really, really important. One of those things, for me, was my grades. I was someone who got straight A's, and that was very important to me. It made me feel like I was somebody. It made me feel like I was special, like I was smart. I got applauded for doing well in school, and school kind of came easy to me. So that was really important to me. And I can remember the day when I got my first B on my report card. My mom probably remembers the day too. I was in 5th grade, and I got my report card. I was always excited about report card day. I would take it home, be like, look at me. And I opened my report card to find a 92% for the marking period. 93 is an A. 92 is a B. And so in 5th grade, Mr. Haggerty's class, I can remember this like it happened yesterday. I was devastated and angry because I was not expecting a B. Certainly, I could have done extra credit. If he would have just told me that I was in danger of receiving a B, I could have done something more, and I could have averted this whole crisis. So I was angry, and I remember my mom interacting in some way with Mr. Haggerty to say, is there not something we could do? Because I was like losing my stuff, like I was not okay. Is there not something that we could do to increase this grade? It's 1 percentage point. Certainly there's something we can do about this. And Mr. Haggerty said, nope, she got a B. She deserves a B, and she got a B, and she will be okay. I can remember in high school, fast forward a few years, when I saw Mr. Haggerty at the grocery store. Now, I can tell you now, he's a kind man. We had little small talk. I have the same face that I had whenever I was 8. So he knew who I was, and we had a conversation. And when I walked away, I was like, Mr. Haggerty gave me a B. Like, there was still something in me that was not okay with this man who really just wanted me to take responsibility for my own grades, who really wanted to show me that it's okay if you're not always the best. And so I say this to say that there are things that we think are really important when we're younger that we grow up and realize maybe they weren't that important. But there are other things that we learn that we think are really important when we're younger that grow up with us and stick with us and show up in other ways. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about what God thinks about that as we look at the life of the younger son in the story of the prodigal son. We're going to be looking at Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 24. And it says, Jesus continued. He was talking to the Pharisees and telling them parables. This is the third of 3 parables that he's telling the Pharisees to show this one truth. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and was found.' So they began to celebrate." As we look at this story, I can see really 3 different movements that we go through, that the prodigal son goes through, and I think we can probably resonate with these 3 movements as we think about the things that we think are really important when we're younger, and then we kind of grow up and maybe realize that they're not so important. The first thing is that the son left home. He left everything that he knew, his way of living, and we can see that he engaged in blatant sin, right? He squandered his wealth in wild living. I think we can imagine what that might mean. Some people have this experience of God, maybe, and they think, man, I just know better. I think I know better what will make me happy. I know better what I need. I know better what the world expects. And so they go and do those things and maybe engage in activities that anyone would look at and say, that's sin. That addiction is sin. That gambling is sin. That spending all of your money on worthless things, that shopping, those drugs, the alcohol, those are sin. And so that's one example of how we can sort of fill ourselves with the things that we think we need. I think we know better and we need to get a quick fix. And so we engage in those things that I think most people would look at and say, yeah, that's pretty clear, right? That's the example that we see here in the younger son. But there's another way that we leave home, that we turn away from the things that might be good for us. And that's in living in our own power for fulfillment. Maybe we don't engage in things that people would look at and say, yep, right there, that's bad, shouldn't do that. Maybe we don't do those things. But there are other, more sneaky ways that we try to fulfill ourselves or to be okay. In preparation for this sermon, I read a book called The Return of the Prodigal by Henry Nouwen, who's a priest. And he talks in this book about his interaction with the painting called The Return of the Prodigal by Rembrandt. His whole life is sort of summed up in this painting, and he's been walking with these ideas that are stirred up as he looks at this work of art in his own life and the ways that God is talking to him about how he's walked away from God and how he can return to God. And I have a picture. This is The Return of the Prodigal by Rembrandt, and you can see here, this is the younger son who's returned to the father. This is supposedly, as far as we can understand, the older son standing beside him. This is the book cover. We don't know who the people in the background are, but Henry Nouwen has suppositions about who those things are. It's a small book. It's actually very good. I would commend it to you. But in that book, Henry Nouwen says, leaving home then is much more than a historical event bound to time and place. That is more than the sinful things that we engage in, more than the clear turning away from God that we can point to and say, yeah, that's not good. It's a denial of the spiritual reality that I belong to God with every part of my being, that God holds me safe in an internal embrace, and that I am indeed carved into the palms of God's hands and hidden in their shadows. Leaving home is living as though I do not have a home and must look for it far and wide to find one. I would say that for most of us, that perhaps is the way that we leave home. That we search for meaning and self-worth and value and love in ways that are of our own manufacturing. The things that we think are going to make people like us. The things that we think are going to make us feel safe, instead of understanding that God gives us that freely, that we can live out of that place of safety and love and acceptance. We don't have to work for that. But so many of us, I think all of us, find ourselves working for the thing that God has already promised us. That's, I think, how most of us find ourselves leaving home and becoming prodigal. So maybe you're someone who's never really allowed to fail. Maybe you always have to be the one to give in to others to make sure that they like you. And so you can't say what's so for you, because you need to make sure that everyone else is having an okay time and thinks that you're agreeable and not mean. Maybe you always have to be the best and the brightest in every room, every class, every workplace. You need to work hard to avoid people seeing you as lazy, stupid, or incompetent. If we are living at home in God, we can fail without feeling like a failure. We can work hard until we're tired, and then we can stop and rest. We can disappoint people who have unrealistic expectations of us, or people who even have realistic expectations of us, and be okay. We can say no when people really want us to say yes, or we're afraid that they might be angry if we say no. We can do that if we're living from a place of our home being in God. We can be vulnerable with our fears and our limitations and allow ourselves to just be human. I was at a conference this week, and the one thing that I really took away, I'm going to mention this later, but the one thing that I really took away is that one of the speakers said that something that she and her husband say to each other at home is, "You're only human. You're only human. You can only do so much." So that's something that I'm holding on to. So we have this, the first movement is that we think we know what we need, and so we chase it. Maybe we chase it in quick hits of endorphins, or maybe we chase it in working really hard, or never being allowed to fail, or always being the best and brightest in every room, or always being agreeable, whatever your always thing is, whatever it is you think you need to be so that people will like you. But then we come to this place, hopefully we come to this place where we recognize, oh, I thought I knew everything, but now I'm afraid I don't know anything. Because that thing that I've been doing didn't fill me, didn't work. I still feel stuck. And so we can see this in the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15, chapter 15, verses 14 through 18. It says, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I think it's very interesting that in the parable, the famine comes after his money's gone. I think that's intentional. Because if the famine came when he still had money, then he wouldn't have maybe been able to do as much wild living as he was doing, but would have had money to take care of himself. But he had nothing. And so he was in a place where he could feel the need. He didn't feel the need when he had all of his father's money and he was having a great time. The need was there. He was just thought he was filling it or taking care of it. But then his money was gone and he was hungry and he felt need. And maybe for the first time, right? This is a rich family. Maybe for the first time in his life, he felt need. And even at first, you can see he thinks, oh, well, I'll just get a job. I'll make a plan. I'm having hard times, but I'm a smart guy. I'll make a plan and get a job and take care of myself. Even still, he's not yet to the point where all he has is need. And so he does that. He gets a job, but still he's finding himself hungry, and it's still not enough. So I'm going to fast forward a couple years from when I saw Mr. Haggerty in the grocery store. 5 years ago, I started a master's degree program in theology. And something that one of my friends said to me before I started was, you're doing a lot. And so it might be really important for you to think about how much you want to give to doing well in this program. Because it's going to take something from everything else. So for sure, you could give everything you have and get a 4.0. But that means that other things are going to have to give up some of your energy, not get as much of your time. And so you need to decide how much you're willing to give. This is something that God has asked you to do, so you need to do it. But maybe you could do just enough. Decide what you're happy with. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, I've grown a lot, so I probably can do that. That won't be a problem. That seems pretty easy to me. And so I had my first class in my program. I wrote a paper that I thought was pretty good. And I got my paper back, and I got an 85. And so as I was telling people, I got an 85 on my first paper. That's how I said it. They were like, oh, that's great. And I was like, no, it's not. I was devastated again that I didn't do the work that I thought I had done, or that something was wrong. I couldn't figure out how I couldn't be or get the best. 85 is not bad, but it wasn't enough for me. Because what if my professor thinks I'm stupid? What if my professor thinks I'm lazy and I'm not giving enough to this program? I'm wasting their time. And so I struggled a lot, more than I should have, about this 85. And so as I was praying about it, I felt like God really came to me and said, Jerry, you care a lot more about how you look than who you are. And I was like, whoa, that's hard. That's hard to hear, because the important thing to me was that this person who was smarter than me, who was above me in some way my authority, the most important thing was that they thought I was invested, that I was worth being there, worth their time. What's true is that I want to be someone who works hard. I want to be someone who's kind and brave and courageous, but that's who I want to be. And I can only be that if I don't care so much about how I look. If I had given every single thing that I had to my next paper, that means that I might not have been the best mom. I might not have had energy to be a good wife. And those things are way more important to me than getting 100% on my paper. I don't even remember what that paper was about. And so I say that to say that there are these things that we think we've dealt with. If we look at the prodigal son, he comes and he's in need and he tries to fix it himself, and he's met with a deeper need. So we think we know everything. We think we know what we need, and then we come to this place where we're like, what I'm doing is not working. There's something deeper happening here. I don't know everything. And then the third place is our response to that. When I recognize, I thought I had dealt with this, but I had not. What do I do now? When the prodigal son, the younger son, comes back and says, Father, I need now. I need to do something else. When he recognizes that he has a deep need, how are we going to respond to that? We have, I think, really two options. The first option is humility. It'd be great if we always did that one, right? The first option is to say, I got it wrong. When God was pointing at my heart and saying, you care more about how you look than who you are, I could have gone into this shame loop, right? Or I can say, I think you're right. How can I own that? How can I give that to you? How can I just be vulnerable with the fact that I'm human and there are these things in me that I need and I don't know how to get filled? Humility leads us to repentance, to say, God, you're right. There's something gross in me and I don't want it. I don't want to behave that way anymore. Will you help me to root it out? Will you give me the thing that I actually need instead of me trying to get it on my own? In the story of the prodigal son, he goes back to the father eventually. Whenever he has a deeper need that he can't fix, right? He turns and he becomes humble. He apologizes and says, Father, I've sinned against you and I've sinned against God. That leads us to life, but we have to be humble enough to receive, to be honest about the ways that we've tried to get our own needs met that have not worked. What's true is that the younger son knows the goodness of the father. When he's in need, when he has nothing left, he thinks, well, my father is good to his servants. I remember that he's good. This is why next generation ministry is so important. There is no guarantee that yours or my children will grow up and say yes to Jesus their whole lives. There is no guarantee of that. Trust me, there is nothing you can do to make them serve Jesus their whole lives. What we can do now is teach them that God is good, to show them the love and kindness of God, the generosity of God, the fact that God will always bring you back, the fact that God will always forgive you, the fact that God will transform you into the kind of person that you want to be, will give you peace, will provide for you, will give you safety. We can teach them that now. That's why college ministry, youth ministry, kids ministry is so important, because when they go off and the world tells them, nope, you have to prove yourself. Nope, you actually are no good and you have no value. Hopefully, we have taught them, and they can remember the goodness of the Father that they learned when they were young and turn around and say, oh, but I think if I remember right, there was this group of people who were kind to me, who told me that God loves me, that he would always provide for me, that he would be my safety, and I didn't have to provide that. Oh, I think I remember that. And they'll come back to the goodness of God. That's what you and I can do now. We cannot control people to make them love Jesus, but we can show them the goodness of the Father so that whenever they get to the place where they experience need, they can remember that there's a different way. That's our responsibility. In our story, the prodigal doesn't know how he's going to be received. He remembers the goodness of the Father, but he's not really sure what's going to happen. And the cost of that, the risk of that, is worth giving up what he has now. We have to get to a place where we can look at ourselves and say, man, what I have now, I'm really stuck. This thing of trying harder or doing better or always trying to have enough, it's not really working. And so I'm willing to empty myself, to be humble and give it to God and hope that the goodness of God that they talk about, the goodness of God that I say I believe in, is actually true. This is the work of emotionally focused. It's why we keep talking about this. Because so often we say things to each other like, give it to God, or just trust God, but we don't really have tools to know how to do that. We don't even know what it is exactly. And so we run a program here called Emotionally Focused that helps you, gives you some tools to understand the places in your heart where you're still trying to do it yourself, such that we can give those things to God. Emotionally Focused is next weekend. Abby and I had a conversation. The registration was supposed to close on Friday. We're going to leave it open today. If as I'm talking, you feel like that's something that you need this exchange for the ways that you've been trying to live your life that just aren't working, for what God has for you, register for EF. You can find that on our website. But what's true, many of you have been through some EF processes. What's true is that it's hard, and it's scary, and it's painful, because we really do believe that the things that we do, if we just do it harder, we're going to feel safe. If I can just have just a little bit more money, if I can just make a little bit more money, it'll be enough, and I'll be safe. Well, no, when you get there, you actually just need just a little bit more. If I just work extra hard, if I just try and show up and I'm the first one to get there, the last one to leave, then that'll be enough. And people will validate me. But what's true is that it's never enough. If we are living for these external things to fulfill us, we can never get enough, because they're not meant to fulfill us. The only way is to receive that, to receive our home, to receive the love and grace and validation of God. So I said there are two ways that we can generally respond. The first one is in humility. The second one is shame loop. That's really the only other way, right? We try, we fail. We try harder, we feel bad about ourselves, we try some more. We start to get mean to other people because we just can't get it and we're frustrated. And so we just go round and round and round again, trying harder, failing. That's the only way, apart from coming to God, repenting, and receiving something different. We use shame to motivate ourselves, but shame is a terrible motivator. It just doesn't work. And I'm not saying this as someone who's never tried. I'm saying this from experience. It doesn't work. We numb ourselves and other things. We get that quick endorphin fix. Maybe we're not even doing the most sinful things, right? Maybe we're just numbing ourselves with food or social media or Netflix or even work, whatever the things are, or performing. What's true is that God's grace is given freely to us. We do not have to earn it. But because we're human, it often takes us a journey to get there, to really receive it. In Luke chapter 15, verses 20 through 24, it says, "So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe, a ring, sandals, the fattened calf. Bring all the things. Bring all the blessing on my son.'" It seems like the father wasn't even really listening to what he says, which I love. He just starts saying, "Bless my son. He's here. He's come." The father is really saying to him and to us, you come and I'll do everything. You come and I'll restore you. You come and I'll take care of you. It's just the act of coming. It doesn't matter if we've prepared the best speech. We don't have to convince him that he should do something kind for us. He is kindness and has already given us all the things that we want. God says in the parable to the son, "I'll use my power and authority to make you safe." Well, that's a word that he's given us as well. I'll use my resources to make you okay. In this conference that I went to this week, the speaker, Drew Hune, who's a great speaker, if you ever come across his stuff, he referenced Timothy Keller, who said that if you want God's grace, all you need is need. All you need is need. And I think too often we come with all these things that we have, or we try to fill our need. But we have to be emptied of those things. We have to give those things over to God. God is not going to take those things from us. He wants genuine love in which we give them to him out of an act of trust, in which we turn and say, "I'm going to go back to the Father because I remember his goodness." And we will always be surprised with how good God is if we can turn to him. God's grace is given freely, but being human means it often takes us a journey to find it. We have to be willing to give up the ways that we make ourselves feel safe.